Hey guys, it's Ian. Just going to go over the last part of this PowerPoint. Now, it might be a good thing that we're not in the classroom for this because I can really go off topic on this. Not so much off topic, on topic, but really, really, really delve into history on this one and kind of get off on a tangent or two. And maybe it's for the best. I'm just literally talking to a camera, and maybe it'll keep me a little more focused. I've been known to maybe make a couple of slides here last like a full class. So I'm going to do my best to keep myself on task and go through. So we're going to talk about a couple of diseases that aren't around anymore. Okay. The first one is smallpox. Now, smallpox was a really big deal. Smallpox killed a lot of people, and there were outbreaks all throughout history. There were outbreaks, in Roman times. There were outbreaks in the Middle Ages. There were outbreaks a lot in England, Europe. There were even outbreaks in the United States that I took out of this, but I'll probably mention it as we go. Okay. Now, this is what someone with smallpox looks like. Smallpox was still around in the 70s and stuff, 60s and 70s in Africa, and it's basically been eradicated now. It's a disease that the World Health Organization essentially considers extinct, and that's a good thing. Okay. Smallpox killed a lot of people. There are some kind of statistics out there that said it would kill like 50% of the people that got it. Now, we don't have great statistics from the past, obviously, right? It was a long time ago. But we know it was really, really, really deadly. Okay. Now, let's go back in time. All right. And you know how I love to get into my time machine. And let's talk about Lady Montague. All right. And we're going to go to the 1700s. Now, Lady Montague was she wasn't a royal, but let's say she was a well-to-do British citizen. Okay, her husband was the ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, so that would be modern day Turkey. And Lady Montague wrote a lot about her travels, about the things she saw, and she brought a lot of those things back to England, which in turn kind of the royal courts of Europe. Okay. And kind of the most important thing she brought back was the concept of vaccination. Now, they didn't call it vaccination. Okay. It had a different name back then. And what she found happening. Now, there's a couple of slides here that go over in a lot of detail. And this is basically what she wrote. Okay. And on your hub page, I am going to also put a link to a podcast. There's a great BBC history podcast that goes into this topic in a lot more detail. I've listened to it a couple times. I think it's fascinating. Okay. But essentially, what Lady Montague found in Turkey was a really, really early vaccination. And if you read through her account, I'm going to give you the Coles Notes version. What would happen is there were kind of different strains of smallpox. Some were more deadly than others. And what they would do is these old ladies would literally collect the pussy scrapings from people that had smallpox but weren't dying, who were recovering from smallpox. And they would scrape off the pus. Yeah, it's pretty gross. They would scrape off the pus and they would basically collect it up in a little, well, they call it a nut. She referred to it as a nutshell. I don't know if it was literally a nutshell, but you can imagine a small little container. And then they would have these parties and they would bring kind of, families would bring children together. And these old ladies would take a little knife, would cut the children, and would put the pus into that cut. Okay, yeah, as gross as it sounds. And within a day or two or a couple weeks, these kids would get sick and they would get smallpox. They would get a really mild form of smallpox. And their bodies wouldn't be covered with the pox, but they would get a few pox. And then they would recover. And what was happening is this was a really early vaccination. Okay, the people in this in modern day Turkey, they had figured out, well, if we expose people to a really mild form, then people will recover. Okay. Now, Lady Montague brought this back with her. There were a lot of skeptics because basically, well, this killed a lot of people. So you can see here on this slide in 1721, at the urging of Montague and the Princess of Wales, who was her friend, several prisoners and abandoned children. Let me say that again. Prisoners and abandoned children. Because who else would you test on, right? Orphans. What they did is they did this to them. So she brought this back to England. They took these orphans and prisoners and they exposed them to smallpox. They cut them, rubbed the pus in, and allowed them to recover. Several months later, they were then purposely exposed to smallpox, right? Because what better way to see if an orphan is immune than to just let him hang out with some people with smallpox? Okay, but it turns out they were all fine. None of them got smallpox. They were protected from smallpox. Now, once this experiment, if you will, happened, like the royals said, this is great. And so members of the royal family all got inoculated. And so, if you were a royal or a really well to do person in any of the European kind of royal courts of the time, you then underwent this procedure and it protected you from smallpox. But it was still like, the majority of the population didn't get this protection. Okay. It took a little while, and we're going to jump ahead to one of my favorite people in science. Okay. And like I said, I could go off on this one. Okay. This is Edward Jenner. Edward Jenner really did the first scientific experiments to prove vaccinations work. Okay. Now, they weren't called vaccinations. Okay. Verilation is the term they used. And what he noticed, and at the time there was a smallpox outbreak, but what he noticed was that milkmaids didn't get smallpox. Okay. Now, milkmaids, as the name implies, they milked cows, and cows would get something called cowpox. Now, exactly what it sounds like. Cowpox are when cows get these little pustules. Okay, think of like chicken pox, right? They would get these pustules, and the milkmaids would be exposed to them. And because they're on the udders milking the cow, they would get exposed to cowpox. And but when there was a smallpox outbreak, none of them would get smallpox. They would have this cowpox and they would be fine. And they would get sores on them, okay, but they would from the cowpox, but they would never get the smallpox. So in 1796, okay, in the great tradition of, you know, inoculating orphans and prisoners and stuff like that, um, Edward Jenner gave young James Phipps, he gave him cowpox, okay, because he wanted to test if, like scientifically, if this would work. And so he did a verilation. Okay, again, he collected the pussy scrapings of a milkmaid. And on this slide here, you can see that's a drawing of Sarah Nelms. She was the milkmaid that had the cowpox. So Jenner went to her and he took scrapings from those open wounds. It's as gross as it sounds. Okay. And he took those pustule scrapings and he took young James Phipps. He cut him, kind of rubbed the pus into that, and he gave young James Phipps cowpox. All right. Um, he then exposed him to smallpox. Okay. So what he did is it wasn't just like, hey, go hang out with this guy with smallpox. No, he took scrapings of someone with smallpox, cut James Phipps again, put the smallpox in. And James Phipps did not get it. Young James Phipps never got smallpox. He was immune. Okay. So Jenner realized, like, oh, like, look what I've discovered here. Like, this is, we can protect everybody from smallpox. By the way, the cow's name that Sarah Nelms got the cowpox from, Blossom. That was always my go-to bonus question in this unit. What was the name of the cow that Sarah Nelms caught cowpox from? Blossom, not just a great TV show from the 80s. Okay, so what happened is Jenner then wrote up a paper and gave it to the Royal Society in England. Okay, and the Royal Society basically said, yeah, no, like you tested this on one person. No, right? And so Jenner being, like realizing this discovery that he had made, Jenner said, okay, well, you know what? Let's do a little more experimenting. Okay, and so this is actually, you can see here, this is a statue of Jenner inoculating a boy. This is in England. You can actually go see this. Okay, but he inoculated several more kids, including his own 11-month-old son. Okay, so that's how confident he was in this. He gave his 11-month-old son cowpox, and then to prove that it would work against smallpox. So pretty radical, right? But he is really known as the father of vaccination, even though Lady Montague, right? She's the one that discovered this in Turkey, or modern day Turkey, right? And brought it back to England. It was really Jenner who brought this to the masses. Okay, now he was ridiculed at first, kind of papers at the time. You can see this is a political cartoon, from the 1800s showing these parties, and there's people that look like pigs and and cows. People used to basically made fun of them, said, this is bunk, right? This isn't real. But what was happening is people would basically have like these get-togethers where they would infect everybody with cowpox. Okay. Now this isn't much different from something a lot of people used to do here with chickenpox. Now everyone gets vaccinated for it. When I was a kid, we would all get chickenpox. And for most of us, chickenpox doesn't hurt you, right? So I can remember as a kid my sister getting chickenpox, and instead of isolating her, we all played with my sister. And as a matter of fact, the neighbors came over, and everybody got chickenpox, like in my whole neighborhood, in like the span of like a month, and then no one ever got it again. It wasn't a big deal. Okay. Similar sort of thing. It's just chickenpox isn't going to kill you. Smallpox can, right? So they would have these parties, and you can see from this the kind of the political cartoonists kind of made fun of it. See this person here looking like an animal, right? So people were against this in the general population, but as it got proven that it works, people kind of slowly came to it and said, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'll get cowpox. I don't want to die of smallpox. All right. Um, so I just want to show you a couple more slides here. Okay. By the early 70s, basically the whole world was eradicated from smallpox. 77 was the last known person to get smallpox. So that is 43 years ago was the last time smallpox infected anybody. Okay, so it's been eradicated for a long time. Um, so yeah, now most of us, right? We don't have protection against smallpox. We've never been vaccinated against it because it's been gone for so long. Okay. Now, a slide I left out, but a quick story I will tell you. General George Washington, right? There was a smallpox outbreak in the 1770s in the United States, and it hit his army. And remember, 1776, that's when the Americans beat the British to form the United States of America. There was an outbreak of smallpox, and Washington actually had smallpox when he was a younger man, and he recovered from it. So he had one of the less virulent forms of smallpox, and he had recovered. And some of his soldiers had it and had recovered. So George Washington actually, even though there was a lot of people saying he shouldn't, he protected his army. So he was losing soldiers to smallpox. What he did is it was called verilation back then. They didn't use the word vaccination. He variolated most of his army. So he exposed them so they would have immunity to smallpox. And there's some people that say that helped him win the war. He lost a lot of fewer soldiers to disease than the British did. Okay, so there are a lot of people who are saying that even though people said Washington shouldn't do it, he went ahead, made that order. He was in charge. He was General George Washington. He was in charge of the Revolutionary Army. So basically, what he said went, and it turned out to be a really good idea. So he saved countless lives of soldiers who then went on to fight to, well, you know, die. Okay. They won though. So that's a positive if you're an American. All right. I threw on this slide because if you were a fan of The Walking Dead, and I won't give away any secrets, I stopped watching it, to be honest. Once Rick left, I was done. I'm out. I read like a spoiler online sort of thing, but I stopped watching. But in season one, you meet Dr. Edwin Jenner, right? A little homage, if you will, to Dr. Edward Jenner. He wasn't a doctor, Edward Jenner, right? So in the thing, Dr. Edwin Jenner, what's he doing? He's working on a vaccine, right? He's trying to cure the virus. So same name? Well, Edwin Jenner, Edward Jenner. His whole thing is he's working at the CDC to come up with a vaccine, right? And he tested it on his wife. So Edward Jenner working on a vaccine, tested it on his family. Edwin Jenner tested it on his family, right? A little, those writers paid a little respect to the past. Now, if you haven't watched Walking Dead and you end up watching this, you can make yourself look smart. You can say, hey, wow, look at that. Edwin Jenner. Did you know Edward Jenner was the person who came up with the smallpox vaccine? Also tested on his family. Okay, so that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you become a better person by knowing pop culture references. Okay. The second disease I want to talk about is polio. Now, again, this is a disease that most of us are not vaccinated against. But if you go talk to your grandparents will probably remember polio. Okay. Polio killed a lot of people and it affected kids and it gave kids a lot of, if you see here, a lot of problems with their legs. So some people would get paralytic polio where their legs would stop working. So a lot of kids with braces and crutches. Some people would have to live in an iron lung. And I have a video here of the last person in an iron lung. There's still one left in the United States, but for a time there were thousands of people. Okay, about 2% of people who caught polio would end up completely paralyzed, and or paralyzed to some degree, some completely paralyzed, and you'd have to be in an iron lung, which basically was your diaphragm, allowed you to breathe. It contracted the muscles in your body so you could breathe. Okay, polio's been around for a long time. Okay, here is an Egyptian carving from 1400 BC. Okay, so that's what, 3,500 years ago. Shows this guy with one lame leg using a kind of a rudimentary crutch. Okay, so polio had always been around, kind of low levels. In the 1900s, it really all of a sudden there was this huge increase in polio cases, especially in developed countries, North America especially. Okay. And so it became a big, big problem. And lots of people were working on a cure. All right. So you might not know who FDR is, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he was the 32nd president in the United States. He was the one kind of with that famous speech, the only thing to fear is fear itself. He had polio. Okay. A couple other famous people here that you may have heard of. And if you hadn't, shame on you. Neil Young, legendary Canadian rock star. Okay. If you don't know his music, you should go look it up. I would suggest starting with a song called Like a Hurricane. Outstanding. He was also in a band called Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. If you want to look up a song called Ohio, Ohio is widely regarded as the greatest protest song of all time. He wrote it in reaction to there was a shooting on the campus of Ohio University in 1968. where there were a bunch of kids, literally kids, not much older than you, protesting the Vietnam War. And some National Guardsmen decided to break up the protest by shooting, and they killed a bunch of people. And so, right after that, the story, see, this is where I get off topic. The story of that is basically this made nationwide news, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at the time were like the biggest band in the world, or one of them, right, along with a couple others, but they were a huge band. And Neil Young sat down and wrote Ohio, and it's like I said, it's listen to it. It's a great song, right? One of my favorites. Not just because of the content, but it's actually an outstanding song. But watch it, listen to it. I recommend it, and you might get some goosebumps, right? Because it's all about these kids dying just for protesting. Okay, so that's your extra assignment. Neil Young. Like I said, Like a Hurricane, good one. Down by the River, excellent. Keep on Rocking in the Free World, that's a good one. But look up the song Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. That's your homework. All right. Gene Simmons from Kiss. Okay, he had it. If you're not familiar with Kiss, you're not missing much, but he had it. Donald Sutherland. Now, your parents might remember him from this movie. Okay, he was in a movie, a National Lampoon movie. Oh my God, I'm having a brain fart. I can't remember the title of the movie right now. With Blue Tarski, it'll come back to me in a minute. You guys might remember him from the Hunger Games. He was the president, okay? But he's been in a lot of movies. He's a famous Canadian actor. His son is Kiefer Sutherland, who you may or may not have heard of, okay? Now, take a step back, okay? So, we're not vaccinated against polio. Your grandparents, okay, probably a lot of them would be vaccinated. And how they did it was people got a shot to vaccinate them. Now there's an oral vaccine, but a lot of people will have this kind of mark on their arm, okay, and that was the polio vaccine. Okay, if you talk to your grandparents about it, they'll probably be able to tell you more about it because in the 1950s, it was a big deal. Okay, and this is a Time magazine cover of, again, one of the, like we talked about, we're talking about some of the big people in science here. This is Dr. Jonas Salk. Okay, he invented the polio vaccine. Okay, now there's no cure for polio. Okay, but there is a vaccine. All right, and again, this is one of these things that when you talk about herd immunity, they vaccinated everybody, right? And they just eliminated polio once he came up with the vaccine. All right, and his vaccine was revolutionary, right? He won the Nobel Prize. Yeah, big deal. Okay, so here it is, the 20s to the 50s. It paralyzed between 13,000 and 20,000 children annually. Okay. In 1953, while working at the University of Pittsburgh, he developed the vaccine. He used a killed virus. Remember from the beginning, there's different ways we can make vaccines. So he used a killed virus. He gave the vaccine to volunteers, again, in the name of science, himself, his wife, and his kids. Okay. Um, they all developed antibodies with no negative reactions. So again, at this time, we could take blood samples, look for antibodies. That's exactly what he did. Okay. Um, they then went on and they inoculated everybody. They vaccinated everybody. They would go to schools and just inoculate the whole school. Okay. So in 1954, national testing began on 1 million children, ages 6 to 9. So, again, this is where we talk about the COVID-19 vaccine, right? Even with polio, right? They tested a million kids. So once he came up with the vaccine, they said, okay, we got to test it. They tested it on a million, right? And it showed a year later in 55 that the vaccine was safe and effective. Okay. And that was a big deal. All right. And there's a video clip here talking about that announcement. I just messed up my own slideshow. How about that? Okay. So, a couple other things about him. All right. This is pretty good. And I've actually put the clip in here of this, okay? Um, on April 12th, 1955, Edward R. Murrow. Now, he was like the biggest newscaster of the time. Don't forget, back then we had three channels, right? Three channels in the United States. You had your ABC, NBC, CBS, right? So Edward R. Murrow was widely regarded as the most, trusted newsman of his time. And here's what Jonas Salk did, right? So Murrow, and this clip here, this YouTube clip here, I put on here is the actual interview. So Murrow asked him, he said, like, who owns the polio vaccine? And Salk said, well, the people do, right? So he never took out a patent on the vaccine. He gave the patent to the University of Michigan. And the University of Michigan then, they made the vaccine. Okay, so he didn't get a dime from the vaccine. He gave it away so that everybody could be vaccinated. So, I mean, that should maybe give you goosebumps that someone comes up with something like that and they give it away. And watch the video clip. You'll hear him talk about it. And I always think that's quite amazing when someone does that. All right. You'll see that's not the first time or the last time that's happened in the history of medicine. When we get into our public health unit, we're going to talk about diabetes, and you're going to see some great Canadians who did the same thing. Okay. But Salk gave away the vaccine so that people would get it. All right. Um, why vaccines work, that is there. You can watch that as well. All right. So I'm going to put on that podcast to about Lady Montague. Listen to it. Don't listen to it. You don't have to. If you're interested, go ahead. I think it's about 32 minutes. About 32 minutes. Maybe I've listened to it a couple times. Okay. I'm also going to put on a link about Jonas Salk. Okay, you can watch that. It's made from the University of Michigan or made by the University of Michigan. I'll put an attachment to that as well. It just goes over the announcement of they have a vaccine and how they went about vaccinating everybody. And if you want some firsthand knowledge, like I said, ask a grandparent. Okay, your grandparents are probably the age of my mom, right? My mom is about 70 something. So your grandparents are probably about my mom's age. So ask one of them. And, or if you have an older aunt or uncle or whoever, right? Ask someone. Don't go visit them, FaceTime them. But you can ask them about if they remember the polio in the 50s. I know my mom does. I've asked her. She was still living in England at the time, but it was a big deal. All right. That's it for me. This is the end of our pathogens and disease unit. So we're going to have a test after this. We'll talk about our test when we have our MS Teams meeting a little later this week. For now, that's it. Thanks for listening. I know I went off a little bit, but I promise you, if we're in the classroom, this would have taken at least 2 days. I'm not going to lie to you. I miss those days, though, guys. I'm not going to lie. I can't wait to get back to school. All right, gang. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you soon.